Madam President, I rise today with some excitement that I get to tell a story that is, in America, thank God, a common story. But this take on this common story also has its difficulties. This story is, in fact, a love story. The first time that Jim Obergefell met the love of his life, John Arthur, neither of them were swept off their feet. Like a lot of couples, they met at a bar, though through mutual friends. They met then a second time, but the sparks didn't really fly then either. It wasn't until a few months later that they met for the third time at a New Year's Eve party. And this time, they fell in love. Jim and John like to joke that theirs was a story of love at third sight. Following the New Year's Eve party, John and Jim began building their lives together in Cincinnati, Ohio. The next 20 years, they spent it doing so many of the things that connected couples do. They said, "I love you" for the first time. They had their first fight, but their bond grew, and this incredible couple moved in together, buying their first home, selling that home, buying another home, working together, building lives together. They moved from job to job, but they stayed together, traveling, making friends, becoming involved with their community. They built a life of love together. Jim and John's love story is a familiar one. They crossed the familiar relationship milestones and faced so many of the same probing questions many of us who are single often get. Why aren't you married? Have you thought about getting married? Hey, what about marriage? Well, of course they had thought about marriage. Their bond was that strong. They were so deeply in love and committed. But their response, unfortunately, was that they had thought of it, but they wanted it to actually mean something legally. They wanted it to be right and just. They wanted their marriage to be affirmed before all, for it to have the depth and the meaning of law. They wanted it to be recognized just like it was for other American citizens. They wanted that ideal deep in our country's heritage, flowing through all of our roots, that they, together as a couple, could have a life, could have liberty, and could pursue their happiness. Well, for them, the time of equality and freedom in our country, for all of us who see that ideal and are moved by it, it was for them at that time, and for all of us seemingly far off. But I tell you this, it's what I love about America, is that you cannot slow down the dream of freedom and equality. It marches forward. We were founded with this ideal, and this is freedom's most fertile ground. Look at our history, and you see all the attempts to stop these fundamental ideals of freedom and equality under the law. People and tyrants with brutality tried to chain our freedom, tried to beat it back. They tried to assassinate its advocates. But just as the statue of freedom that sits on the Capitol dome, freedom rises, and it will come. Jim and John watched the progress march in our country, as so many of us did, with encouragement, slowly, painfully slowly, but steadily. It marched forward. And as they watched and waited, they went on living their lives of love together. Almost 20 years, their union, their bond as committed people with unconditional love. Unfortunately, though, John began having problems walking. And after months of tests, the doctor's appointments, the prodding and the probing, John was diagnosed with ALS. The typical prognosis for a patient with ALS is 2.5 to 5 years. Well, Jim became John's primary caregiver. He leapt up. He had unconditional love. And there were definitely trying times. But he said he considered it a privilege to care for his life's love. 2 years after John's diagnosis in 2013, he was receiving hospice care and confined to a bed in a hospital bed in their Cincinnati home, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Edith Windsor, declaring that the Defense of Marriage Act was unconstitutional and setting the stage for an even greater national movement towards marriage equality. Setting the stage after years of struggle and fights and sacrifice for equal rights, for equality under the law, for love to be affirmed in marriage between two Americans, to be affirmed and equally recognized, not condemned, not banned, not made illegal. And so on a warm day in June, after spending 20 years of love, of commitment, of unconditional bonding, they built a life together. It was at this moment that Jim leaned over to John, sitting there in his hospital bed. He kissed him and proposed, "Let's get married." Because Ohio has yet to recognize marriage equality, and with John confined to his bed, this was going to be challenging. Their options were limited. Transporting John to a state that would recognize their marriage would require a special medically equipped airplane, and it would require a lot of money they did not have. Jim asked for ideas on Facebook, and people came forward unprompted. Jim and John's friends raised $13,000 to cover the entire cost of a specially chartered medical plane. A few weeks later, Jim, John, and John's aunt Paulette, who became ordained to perform the service, boarded a plane in Ohio that took off and landed nearby in Maryland. In this state, they recognized marriage equality. In this state, they recognized the love of two American citizens. And for 7.5 minutes on the tarmac in Baltimore Washington International Airport, John and Jim, two Americans, had their wedding. Sitting on the tarmac, Jim holding his partner of 20 years' hands. They held hands, and even though one lacked dexterity and strength, they held on to each other. And Jim said this to John: "We met for the first time. My life didn't change. Your life didn't change. We met a second time. Still nothing changed. Then we met a third time, and everything changed. As you recently said, it was love at third sight. And for the past 20 years, 6 months and 11 days, it's been love at every sight." In a cramped medical airplane, John's aunt began the formal vows. She started to say, "Take each other's hands," but realizing that they had never let go of each other's hands. They exchanged their rings, Jim helping John place the ring on his own finger. And after the ceremony, they left that Maryland tarmac to fly back. Jim and John arrived home to the realities of a disease like ALS. John was dying. And while they had taken their eternal vows together, while their marriage was affirmed by love, affirmed by this unbreakable commitment, affirmed by loving family and by friends, affirmed legally by the state of Maryland. Their marriage was disavowed by their home state, the state that John would eventually die in. The men, though, at this time decided to work with a civil rights attorney who feared that absent their action on their part, John's death certificate would list him as unmarried, an assault on the dignity of two great men. His life with his partner, their 20 years of love and commitment and ultimate affirmation of those years, their marriage would mean nothing according to the government on this document. The last documentation of John's life, this insult, his love, his life of love and meaningful commitment and bond, it would be denied on this paper by their government. Denied, negated, disallowed by his government. This man, married to the love of his life, would die in his home, in his state, listed on that final government document as single. With their attorney, the men filed a lawsuit to have John and Jim's marriage legally recognized in Ohio. A week and a half after their marriage, a district judge in Ohio ruled to recognize their marriage, but that was just the start of a long legal fight. In the last months of John's life, Jim worked with the attorney to continue the fight for recognition of their citizenship rights as Americans. People would ask Jim, why, when your husband is dying, would you use the last days together to fight this, to do this? Jim's response was simple: why not? Jim could not think of any better way to honor his husband, to live up to their vows, to demonstrate the power of their love, the power of their commitment, the power of love in our world. A little over 3 months after their marriage, the inevitable eventually arrived. John passed away at the young age of 48. Amid his overwhelming grief, Jim found a small but substantive source of solace. On John's death certificate, he was listed as married, with Jim's name listed as his surviving spouse. The state of Ohio, though, appealed the decision to list John as married. Their government went to court to strip he and his beloved of this recognition. And they won, with state officials making it their mission to change John Arthur's death certificate. Jim now stands as a named plaintiff, though, in an appeal to the United States Supreme Court, appealing to the highest court in the land to have their citizenship rights recognized, their love recognized, their vow and commitment be worthy of recognized, that they are full American citizens. They've joined with cases from 3 other states also seeking that affirmation of citizenship, of equality under the law. Together, all these cases have come to represent the cause paving the way for marriage equality to become a reality in our nation. Jim and John's story is moving as their case is being heard in a building with emblazoned on its side the highest ideal of our land, equality under the law. Their story is heartbreaking. It is inspiring. But unfortunately, in our nation right now, it is all too common. This story of theirs about the persistent, unyielding, indefatigable love, conquering indifference, about our ideals of equality, conquering inequality in our country. This call of their hearts for each other reflects the larger cause for our country, for itself, for us to live our truth. It calls that question forward. What kind of country will we be? Will we be the nation of love and freedom and equality? Will we be the nation that every single generation has had people standing up for these ideals? people pushing to march forward for our country these ideals. This is not a question about sexual orientation or race or gender. It is a question about whether our country will live up to the ideals we say every time we pledge allegiance to our flag, liberty and justice for all. Will we have equality under the law? Or will we tolerate a government that denies some citizens fundamental rights while granting them to others? This is the question that is being called. It's a question that echoes throughout our history. It's Sojourner Truth standing in Akron, Ohio at the Women's Convention, calling the question, "Ain't I a woman?" It's a question by my family members I heard standing strong, saying defiantly, "I am a man. I too am American citizen." Proclaiming those words, generation after generation has strained at chains, has fought Jim Crow. It's what Susan B. Anthony said when she called the truth of our country. She said it's we the people, not we the white male citizens, nor we the male citizens, but we the whole people who form the Union. This is the ideal. The love of our country, the sacrifice for our principles, this ideal has been fought for generation after generation. The question was called by abolitionists, by suffragettes. They called the question, will we be a nation of liberty and justice for all? Throughout our history, the question was called, will we have freedom for all? Will truth march on, our truth march on as it did in Selma? As it gathered in church basements, it protested at Stonewall, it came together at Seneca Falls. Will we live our truth despite the assassinations of its advocates like Milk and King, like Matthew Shepard or Emmett Till? Will our march come to fruition, this fight for recognition of full citizenship beyond race, beyond creed, beyond color, beyond orientation? It is this dream that must be secured for all of our citizens. As Langston Hughes said so clearly, there is a dream in this land with its back against the wall. To save the dream for one, we must save the dream for all. Well, we fight for this dream here. The time is nigh. The anguish has gone on long enough. And I'll tell you, I found out just preparing my remarks that we still face these weary years and too many silent tears. I sat with staff members and learned of some of their struggles right here, Capitol employees. One of my young staffers shared that he entered his adult life unsure if his full citizenship rights would be an option in his lifetime. Could he have equality under the law? Could he be married? Like many gay men and lesbians decades before him, he was afraid that his country would cast his love as less meaningful, at best, or at worst, vile and immoral. Yet today, as this case before the Supreme Court, it makes him hopeful that we can live in a country that one day recognizes his love, his value, his dignity as being equal under the law. Another staff member told me that he feared that his coming out as gay would mean that his own family would never accept him. He shared what he described as a defining moment in his own valuation of his self-worth when he came out as gay to his deeply religious grandmother. She held his hands tightly in her own, looked at him in the eyes, and proclaimed, "I will always love you, and I will love anyone who loves you." All across America right now, there are weary years, there are silent tears, there is unspoken pain in a country that does not value the dignity, worth, and equal citizenship rights of too many. What message does it send? How many stand in uncertainty and fear and despair that threatens to consume the potential of young people? I see the data of suicide rates rising for our gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender teens. We cannot give any implicit support for any idea that they are lesser or less worth or less citizens. And we all should come together and condemn so-called therapies that purport to change who people are at their core, as if it is not enough, as if they are not worthy. All across the country, this struggle is going on, from intimate personal struggles to public fights, stories of love meeting fear, stories of hope meeting despair, of families and communities coming together to stand up and say, I am an American, I am a citizen, I deserve equality under the law. As Jackie Robinson said then, it is true now, the right of every American to first-class citizenship is the most important issue of our time. Jim and John and all America have a right not to second-class citizenship, but first-class citizenship, to honor their first-class love. Well, I'm a prisoner of hope today. I'm not going to let disappointment after disappointment undermine my infinite sense of hope for our country. Our history as a nation is a screaming testimony, the perpetual achievement of freedom and light and truth overcoming inequality and hatred. Just 3 years ago, only 6 states and Washington, D.C. had marriage equality, with 34 million Americans living now in marriage equality states. 37 states now and D.C. have marriage equality, meaning now 224 million Americans live in states that honor equal rights to marriage. This movement has been a strong validation of our country's history. It is a shining example that progress can come. However, just because of the arc of freedom bending towards justice does not mean it won't meet resistance. As King's word said, change never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. We are the architects of our nation. We are the truth tellers, light workers, and lovers that must exalt our principles. We cannot fail now. Love is on the line. Citizenship is on the line. We are interdependent. We need each other. We cannot deny the worth of one American without denying the worth, dignity, and strength of our nation as a whole. The story of Jim Obergefell and John Arthur is a story not just of unconditional love and unconditional hope. It's not just about the two of them, but it's about our country. This is the story of all of us, of America. It's a story of what our truth will be. One of this incredible partnership has passed away, but I know their love marches on. And I believe in this country, our truth will march on, and equality and justice will have its way.